One of the biggest reasons why everybody loves Marvel movies so much is because of the awesome fight scenes. There's a big difference between two regular humans slugging it out, compared to having wizards and space monsters battle with magical superpowers. Throughout the first 3 phases of the MCU, we've seen some pretty remarkable battles. There was the Battle of New York from the original Avengers movie, the Battle of Sokovia in Avengers Age of Ultron, and the Battle on Titan in Avengers Infinity War, and many more where those came from. However, you ever stop to think about the repercussions of all of these mega fights? Seriously, just consider for a moment how much damage is done every time we see some heroes and villains go head to head. The damage caused is unthinkable, and yet the heroes habitually leave the scene with their heads held high, proud of saving the day when they've actually contributed to the disaster that is the aftermath. So what happens to these places after they get destroyed? Well, there's actually one person cashing in on it all, and who it is might shock you. Okay, so how does it all work? Who the heck pays for all of this damage and who's cleaning it all up? Superheroes often leave places completely and utterly obliterated following these epic showdowns. In fact, if they just used their superpowers to help clean up a little bit, it probably wouldn't even take that long. Just imagine how useful someone like Doctor Strange could be using his magic powers to just put everything back where it belongs. Or how much rubble the Hulk could probably move around compared to the average human. Heck, Tony Stark could just have his army of Iron Man drones do all the work. Sadly, I don't think any of that is what actually happens. There's just so many moving parts to consider with events of this magnitude. Like, do cities have insurance for this kind of thing? Are there even insurance companies able to pay out massive multi-billion-dollar insurance claims every time there's an alien invasion that needs to be thwarted? And how are the victims compensated for these types of occurrences? Imagine your apartment gets destroyed because Thor meant to blast a bad guy who jumped out of the way. Or what about these high-rise office buildings that always tend to get obliterated? It's easy to overlook the fact that real humans work in these buildings, and it probably takes months, if not years, to get those facilities back up and running. So who knows how many companies and offices get displaced? The Battle of New York alone probably took several months to recover from, at the very least. So how are these victims compensated? Is there a system in place that takes care of those affected by these battles? Insurance companies in the MCU must have some pretty astronomical policies, considering all the carnage liable to happen at any moment. However, the most detail we get is after the the blip. Why they decided to go with blip, I'll never understand. Either way, we see the empty parking lots and the desolate cities that get left behind after Infinity War. We even see Captain America acting as a grief counselor, trying to help people cope with the aftermath. Even after humanity is restored, at the end of Endgame, we see Peter Parker and his pals raising money for victims of the blip in Far From Home. Reincorporating half of the world's population after 5 years of them being gone is logistically a terrifying thought. The world had probably adapted by then to a smaller population, then to suddenly double it is a nightmare for pretty much every industry imaginable. So maybe it's less of an insurance thing and more of like a crowdfunded thing? Like the Battle of Sokovia completely destroys an entire country, and then the heroes just leave as if they won. Sure, they won the battle against their foe, but they certainly didn't succeed in saving the territory that they were protecting. Perhaps it's more on neighboring countries, or even the United Nations, to help out and rebuild after such horrific events. For instance, in the original Avengers movie, the Battle of New York all but completely obliterates the Big Apple. Just look at this carnage. Between all the roads and bridges that got damaged in the process, infrastructure repairs alone were probably a couple $100 million. Hundreds if not thousands of cars were damaged if not completely destroyed in the battle as well. Seriously, entire city blocks worth of cars get taken out without breaking a sweat. If we estimate that 1,000 cars got totaled at an average of 10 to 15,000 each, that's over $1 million just in cars. We haven't even mentioned the giant space robot that clumsily crashes into at least 20 different skyscrapers. The total dollar amount of the Battle of New York was probably south of $1 billion. Plus, it must have taken them months if not years to rebuild properly and get everything back to normal. Yet it gets marked in the win column for the Avengers? Go figure. And that's not even close to the only example. During Winter Soldier, Captain America and his pals destroy 3 helicarriers in Washington, D.C. According to my research, in 2008, the USA's newest helicarrier cost approximately $13 billion. These guys destroyed 3 of them. That's almost $40 billion. No wonder the guy was one of the most wanted men in the world. Perhaps the largest toll of all was the aftermath from the Battle of Sokovia from Avengers Age of Ultron. This one pretty much erased an entire country off the face of the earth. Sure, it's not a real country like in the real world, but in the MCU it's real and they completely destroy it. Then, after all the wreckage and loss, the heroes walk away with their heads held high as if they saved the day, oblivious to the fact that they're responsible for unthinkable damages. I can't even make an estimate for how much that battle cost, because how much is a whole country worth? And when I say they're responsible for the damages, I mean it. Don't you forget that Ultron was Tony Stark's brainchild. The Avengers got themselves into this entire mess. Sure, they stopped the main antagonist from obliterating humanity, but nonetheless, they also created the antagonist and therefore are responsible for the outcome of the battle to defeat it. In fact, the Battle of Sokovia and the results that came from it are exactly what leads Helmut Zemo to seek revenge. He lost his family in the wreckage, not to mention his entire homeland, and as a result, blames the Avengers for that horrible situation. He also, isn't wrong about that. They made Ultron, so it's definitely their fault. He eventually develops the game plan that leads to Captain America Civil War and is the main catalyst behind the Avengers splitting up in that movie. Zemo is the mastermind behind the whole thing. So how do all of these places regroup after such awful events? Is it crowdfunded? Is there some sort of United Nations task force that helps clean up after disasters? Well, we found out the answer, and it's actually much worse than you could have imagined. Okay, so there's this company called Damage Control. It's a fictionalized construction company that reappears throughout the Marvel comics. The company specializes in repairing the property damage caused by conflicts between superheroes and supervillains, making them, super contractors. The company first appears in 1988's Marvel Age Annual in a 5-page story titled The Sales Pitch. Here's where things get really shady. Damage Control was originally founded by Miss Anne-Marie Hoag and was originally owned by William Fisk and, oh dear, Tony Stark. Let that sink in for a second. Yeah. That means that not only was Tony Stark cool partnering up with a known criminal, but he was flying around causing all this damage and carnage while also profiting off of it. That's some next level shady business practices right there. Tony doesn't even need to be a superhero. It's not like he has any mutant skills or tangible superpowers. He's just a rich genius who knows how to make weaponized suits. There was never a necessity or a requirement that he partake in battle, but it makes all the sense in the world why he'd do so with this bit of info in mind. Of course he'd get involved, in order to ensure that things get as out of hand as possible without actually ever losing to the bad guys. Heck, Tony may even have known that Ultron would spaz out and go haywire. It's not like Tony to make a programming mistake, especially one of that magnitude. It was probably intentional. We've seen Damage Control in the MCU as well, or at least an iteration of it. In 2017's Spider-Man Homecoming, it's a government agency known as the US Department of Damage Control, a joint venture between Stark Industries and the US government. That's the company that puts Adrian Toomes out of business and drives him to a life of crime as the Vulture. That's Tony's fault. Toomes was just trying to clean up our cities and make enough to support his family, but greedy Tony Stark couldn't even allow that to happen. There's no way that the other Avengers know about this either. That would not fly with the rest of this uber-moral group. Tony owning Damage Control is a massive conflict of interest and absurdly unjust. He's contributing to the destruction of cities and then profiting off of it. That's honestly despicable. In fact, I'm not sure if there's a Marvel movie where Tony Stark doesn't end up profiting somehow. In Iron Man 3, Tony's responsible for ruining an entire shipyard in Miami, Florida. He literally has an army of Iron Man suit drones rain down on the final destination and completely obliterated it. In Endgame, the entire Avengers facility gets decimated, which I'm sure Tony Stark owned, seeing as how he owned the previous one. But we do know that it was big, we know that it was probably expensive, and we know that it doesn't exist anymore. If a standard sports arena costs a couple $1 billion to construct, then this facility, with all the tech put into it, had to be at least 20 times that? So what have we learned? Tony Stark was a fantastic capitalist, and despite sacrificing himself to save humanity, I'm not sure that's enough to save him from being a truly terrible person. Profiting off of the misfortunes of others, misfortunes that he habitually causes and is the culprit of, is some next level shadiness. I'm disappointed to say the least. What do you think? Is Tony Stark a jerk for owning damage control, or do you think that that's smart of him? Sound off in the comments down below. Let's see what your moral compass is like. Before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our latest releases, and do us a favor by hitting that thumbs up, because it makes us feel good. Until next time, bye!